Some mysteries only become stranger over time. Evidence fades, witnesses die, memory becomes unreliable. Eventually, the truth disappears beneath decades of speculation. But every so often, a mystery refuses to die. Not because new evidence is discovered, but because the evidence that already exists never seems to fit together. The disappearance of the 5 Sodder children is one of those mysteries. On Christmas Eve 1945, a house in the mountains of West Virginia burned to the ground. 5 children were believed to have died inside. The official investigation closed the case. The fire was ruled accidental. The children were declared dead. But there was one problem. No bodies were ever found. Not one. What followed wasn't simply a grieving family refusing to accept tragedy. It was decades of unexplained phone calls, contradictory evidence, anonymous photographs, sightings hundreds of miles away, and questions that investigators never convincingly answered. So, were 5 children really consumed so completely by fire that nothing remained? Or did they walk away from that burning house, never to return? This is the story of the Sodder children. The Sodders were, by all accounts, a large and hard-working family. George Sodder had immigrated to the United States from Italy as a teenager. Through years of determination, he built a successful trucking business near Fayetteville, West Virginia. His wife, Jenny, raised their 10 children in a comfortable home, perched on a hillside overlooking the town. Neighbors knew them, business was good, the children were healthy. Nothing suggested that Christmas Eve of 1945 would become one of the most enduring mysteries in American history. Yet there were strange moments leading up to that night. George was an outspoken man. He had openly criticized Benito Mussolini long after many Italian immigrants avoided discussing politics. Most people dismissed it as just strong opinions. But George himself later claimed those arguments occasionally became heated enough that he received threats. At the time, they seemed insignificant, but after the fire, they would take on a very different meaning. Christmas Eve arrived much like any other. The younger children were excited. Presents had been opened. The house was warm despite the winter cold outside. As midnight approached, Jenny encouraged everyone to go to bed. However, 5 children remained downstairs just a little longer. Maurice, Martha, Louis, Jenny, and Betty. They wanted to play with their new toys before finally going upstairs. And so George and Jenny went to sleep believing that their family was safe, but within mere hours, their lives would never be the same. It's around 12:30 in the morning and the house is finally quiet. Christmas Eve is almost over, and after a long night of celebrating, everyone is beginning to settle in. Upstairs, 5 of the younger children are already asleep. dreaming about the presents waiting for them in just a few hours. But then the telephone rings. In the silence of the night, the sound is shattering. Jenny gets out of bed to answer it. There's a woman's voice on the other end. She asks for someone that Jenny does not recognize. In the background, Jenny can hear strange laughter and the clinking of glasses, as if a party is taking place somewhere far away. She tells the caller that they have the wrong number. The woman just laughs and then hangs up. Jenny stands there for a moment, holding the receiver, just listening to the dead line. The call feels strange, but not strange enough to alarm her. Not yet. Still, it leaves a faint uneasiness behind, the kind that lingers in the back of your mind, even after you try to brush it away. She sets the phone down and walks back through the dark house. But as she does, she notices something unusual. The lights are still on downstairs, and the curtains are still wide open. The front door is unlocked. One of the older girls must have forgotten before going to bed. Jenny pauses, more annoyed than anything else. It's late, and the house should already be shut up for the night. And so she moves through the rooms, turning off the lights one by one, the click sounding loud in the silence. She locks the front door, pulling the curtains closed, and makes sure everything is as it should be before heading back upstairs. A few more minutes pass and the house becomes silent again, but then a heavy thump crashes onto the roof. Not a creak, not the sound of the wind, a loud, solid impact. It rolls across the roof above them before everything falls quiet once more. The family has no idea what caused it. No one goes outside to investigate, and eventually they drift back to sleep. About half an hour later, George suddenly jerks awake. He knows instantly that something is very wrong. He knows it before he's even fully conscious. The feeling hits him first, sharp and immediate, like a warning he cannot explain. His chest tightens, his eyes open wide in the darkness. For one stunned second he lies still, just listening, and then the smell reaches him. Smoke. At first it's faint, but then within mere seconds it's overwhelming. He sits up fast, his heart already pounding before he fully understands what he's smelling. The air is thick and bitter, burning his throat and nose. He throws off the blankets and opens the bedroom door. Orange light flickers through the hallway. Fire. For one stunned second, he just stands there, staring at the glow, his mind struggling to catch up with what his eyes are seeing. And then the reality of it hits him all at once. Immediately, he begins shouting for everyone to wake up. Get out! Get out! The once peaceful home erupts into total chaos. Children stumble from their rooms, still half asleep, confused by all the shouting. Some are crying before they even understand why. Others are coughing, rubbing at their eyes, trying to make sense of the smoke filling the hallways. The crackling grows louder every second, sharp and hungry, like the fire is racing through the house faster than anyone can move. The heat becomes intense almost immediately. Smoke pours through the hallways, making it difficult to breathe. George and Jenny rush through the house, desperately trying to gather everyone together. Some of the children manage to escape through the front of the house. Others climb out of windows into the freezing Christmas morning air. Outside, everyone is coughing, crying, trying to understand what just happened. Their breath hangs in the cold air. Their nightclothes are thin against the winter chill. Some stand barefoot in the snow, staring back at the house in disbelief as flames begin to swallow it whole. And then George starts counting. 1, 2, 3. His heart sinks. He counts again. 5 children are missing. Maurice, Martha, Louis, Ginny, Betty, all still inside. The realization hits him like a blow. For a moment, everything else disappears. The shouting, the smoke, the fire, even the cold. All he can think about is the 5 children that are trapped somewhere in that burning house. Without thinking, George charges back towards the flames. But the front entrance is now completely blocked by fire. He can feel the heat on his face from several feet away. The doorway is a wall of orange and black, roaring and snapping, too fierce to pass through. And so he smashes a window out with his bare arm, sending shards of glass flying everywhere. The glass slices deep into his flesh, but he forces himself inside anyway. The smoke is blinding. The heat is unbearable. He calls out each of their names again and again, but only the roar of the fire answers him. Burning beams begin crashing down around him. The ceiling starts to collapse. He has no choice but to make a hasty retreat. Outside, still refusing to give up, George runs for the ladder that he always keeps propped against the side of the house, but it's gone. He stops short, staring at the empty spot where it should be, as if his eyes might be lying to him. He looks again, scanning the side of the house in disbelief, but there's nothing there. No ladder, no quick way up, no chance to reach the upstairs window the way that he'd planned. For a moment, George is frozen, helpless and stunned, the fire crackling behind him while his mind races for another way in. He sprints to his work trucks, planning to drive one over and then climb on top of it to reach the upstairs windows. But when he turns the key, nothing. He tries the second truck. Nothing again. Both trucks, which had been running normally just the day before, are inexplicably dead. George stands there in the cold, staring at the silent engines, his frustration turning into panic. One failure after another seems to close in around him, each one cutting off another chance to save his children. Helpless, George can do nothing but watch as flames engulf his home. Within mere minutes, the roof caves in. The upstairs bedrooms disappear behind fire and smoke, and those 5 children inside are never seen again. The fire department was called, but help did not arrive quickly. The town's phone operator desperately tried to reach the volunteer fire chief. No answer. Another firefighter couldn't be reached. Instead of a coordinated response, the department's lack of a proper alert system forced the chief to contact firefighters one by one. Minutes passed, then more minutes, and by the time help finally reached the Sodder home, the house was already long gone. What had once been a 2-story family home was now nothing more than a pile of burning rubble. The Christmas decorations, the furniture, the bedrooms where 5 children had slept only hours earlier, all reduced to ash. But as morning arrived, something else became immediately clear. Something was missing. George Sodder searched through the remains himself. Like any father desperately hoping that his children had survived, he looked for anything. A bone, a piece of clothing, a shoe, a fragment of evidence that could prove what everyone assumed, that his 5 children had died there. But he found almost nothing. No bodies, no recognizable remains, not even enough evidence to confirm that 5 people had been inside that house when it burned at all. The official explanation came quickly. The fire had been so intense that the children's bodies had been completely destroyed. But George and Ginny were not convinced, and as they looked deeper into the disaster, the questions only multiplied. Now, a normal house fire can destroy almost everything, but complete cremation of human remains is incredibly rare. Professional crematoriums require extremely high temperatures, sustained for long periods of time in order to reduce a body to bone fragments. And the Sodder fire had burned for a much shorter period before the home collapsed. Yet somehow, 5 children had supposedly disappeared without leaving behind a single identifiable trace. Not a tooth, not a bone fragment, not a piece of evidence that they had ever been there. Then came the discoveries that made the family's doubts grow even stronger. The telephone line had not simply burned during the fire, it had been cut. Investigators found that the wire appeared to have been deliberately severed high on the utility pole before the flames ever reached it. Someone had apparently made sure the family could not call for help. And then there was the ladder. George's heavy extension ladder was always kept outside the house. During the fire, he desperately needed it to reach the upper windows where his children were trapped. But when he went to grab it, it was gone. The ladder had not burned. It had not been destroyed. It had been moved. Months later, it was discovered hidden away in a ditch near the property. And then there were the trucks. George owned 2 large coal trucks that he believed could have helped him reach the upper floors and rescue the children. The vehicles had been working perfectly just the day before, but during the fire, neither one would start. Later, the family suspected that both vehicles had been tampered with. The cut phone line, the missing ladder, the disabled trucks, the strange failures that all happened on the same night. Each one alone could possibly be explained away, but together, they suggested something far more disturbing. That someone may have wanted to prevent the Sodders from saving their children. And then came the investigation that created one of the biggest mysteries in American history. If 5 children had truly died in that fire, then where were the remains? Unable to accept the official conclusion, George eventually had the ruins covered with dirt and turned the area into a memorial garden. But in doing so, the original crime scene was permanently altered. Years later, investigators would return and conduct another excavation. This time, they discovered 4 lumbar vertebrae buried beneath the property. For a moment, it seemed like the mystery had finally been solved. But forensic testing would raise even more questions. The bones belonged all to a single individual, not to 5 children, and they showed no evidence of having been exposed to the intense heat of the fire. Even more strangely, experts determined the remains belonged to someone much older than any of the missing Sodder children. Instead of confirming that the children died in the fire, the discovery only created a whole nother mystery. Because if those bones did not belong to the Sodder children, then what happened to them? And why was there still no evidence that 5 children had ever perished inside the burning remains of the Sodder home? The answers would lead the family into decades of searching, and into a trail of strange clues, suspicious sightings, and discoveries that only made the mystery deeper. As investigators searched for a cause, the official explanation came quickly: an electrical fire. According to state investigators, faulty wiring had sparked the blaze that destroyed the Sodder home. Just a tragic accident, a heartbreaking twist of fate. But George Sodder never accepted that explanation, because only months before the fire, the home's electrical system had been inspected, and according to the power company, there was no known problem with the wiring. At least nothing that should have caused a fire of that magnitude. As George searched for answers, his mind kept returning to the months before Christmas. In particular, to a series of encounters that had once seemed strange, but now felt impossible to ignore. One of the first came when a man stopped by the house, claiming to be looking for insurance work. However, the conversation quickly took an unsettling turn. Angrily, the man warned George that his home would one day go up in flames, and that his children would be destroyed. And according to George, this man blamed his outspoken criticism of Italian dictator Benito Mussolini. At the time, George dismissed the threat as just the ranting of some angry stranger, but after the fire, it became much harder to forget. Then there was another visitor. A man claiming to know electrical work examined the home's fuse boxes and warned George that they were dangerous. He insisted that they would eventually start a fire. That warning made little sense. After all, the home's electrical system had already been inspected and declared safe, so George thought little of it at the time. But after the official investigation pointed to faulty wiring, the encounter suddenly seemed far more suspicious. Then came another unsettling report. In the weeks before Christmas, some of the older Sodder children told their parents they'd noticed a man parked near the route their younger brothers and sisters took home from school, and he wasn't simply passing through. According to the family, he appeared to be watching the children specifically. On its own, it could have meant nothing, just another stranger on the side of the road. But when George looked back on everything that had happened, he no longer saw these incidents as unrelated. And then there was one final detail. On the night of the fire, Jenny had remembered hearing something strike the roof. A loud thud, followed by the sound of something rolling overhead. At the time, she didn't think much of it. But sometime after the fire, George discovered a small, hard, rubber object on the property, and he became convinced that it was some kind of incendiary device. He believed it had been thrown onto the roof, and that it was what Jenny had heard moments before the fire began. Of course, investigators never proved that theory, but for George, it fit too many pieces of the puzzle to ignore. A threat, a warning, a stranger watching the children, and a mysterious object found after the fire. None of it proved what happened, but together it was enough to convince George and Jenny that what destroyed their home may not have been an accident at all. And if they were right, then someone knew exactly what was going to happen on that fateful Christmas night. George Sodder refused to let the case end. While officials considered the fire a tragic accident, George believed the investigation had left too many questions unanswered. Rather than accepting the official verdict, he began conducting an investigation of his own. He requested reports, he interviewed witnesses, and he spent years comparing every statement, every timeline, and every piece of evidence connected to the case. And the more he looked, the less confidence he had in the official conclusion. One of his biggest concerns was how quickly investigators concluded that the 5 missing children had died in the fire. To George, that decision came before every lead had been fully explored. As the years continued to pass, George wrote letters, contacted investigators, and followed up on every credible lead that he could find. He wasn't trying to prove a theory. He was trying to find his children. Then the sightings began. One woman claimed she'd seen the missing children only hours after the fire. She told the family she'd witnessed several children matching their descriptions, riding in a passing car while the house was still burning. Another witness, who operated a tourist stop between Fayetteville and Charleston, later reported serving breakfast to 5 children accompanied by 2 women and 2 men on the morning after the fire. She remembered the group because the adults appeared nervous and discouraged anyone from speaking to the children. At the time, she had no idea they might be connected to one of the country's most baffling missing persons cases. It would be only years later, after seeing photographs of the Sodder children, that she would contact the family. And there were other reports as well. One woman claimed she had seen children resembling the missing siblings at a hotel in Charleston shortly after the fire. According to her, the children were accompanied by adults who appeared unwilling to let anyone interact with them. She later claimed she tried to speak to the children, but was met with hostility before the group quickly left. However, none of these accounts could ever be conclusively verified. but neither could they be completely disproven. To George and Jenny, each report was another reason to keep searching for their children. And then, in the year 1952, they decided to take their search to the public. Along Route 16 in Fayetteville, they erected a massive billboard displaying photographs of the 5 missing children, along with a reward for information that could help solve the case. And over the years, that reward only increased as their determination never faded. The billboard became impossible to ignore. Thousands of motorists passed it every single year, and for many it was the first time they'd ever heard of the Sodder mystery. Before long, the family began receiving even more letters, more phone calls, and more claims that their children had been seen alive. Most of these leads led nowhere, but one would stand apart from all of the others. After years of searching, George and Jenny Sodder realized that they needed help. They had followed every lead that they could find. They had questioned the official investigation. They had contacted anyone who might have information, but no matter how hard they searched, the answers they wanted remained out of reach. And so they needed the public to start looking with them. So in 1952, they made a decision that would change the Sodder case forever. Along Route 16 in Fayetteville, they built a massive billboard displaying the faces of their 5 missing children: Maurice, Martha, Louis, Jenny, and Betty. 5 photographs, 5 children who had disappeared on Christmas Eve. And beneath their faces was a simple question: what happened to our children? The billboard was more than a desperate plea. It was a message to anyone who might know something. George and Jenny wanted people to remember that they were still searching, that they had never accepted the idea that their children were simply gone. And most importantly, they wanted someone with answers to come forward. The billboard quickly gained attention. Thousands of people passed it every single year. Newspapers continued covering the disappearance, and strangers across the country began learning the story of the 5 Sodder children. Soon, the letters started arriving. Phone calls came in. People shared memories, rumors, and possible clues. Most of the information led nowhere. Some claims were impossible to verify. Others faded away as quickly as they appeared. But among all of the tips that George and Jenny received, one was unlike any other. It wasn't a person claiming that they had seen the children. It wasn't a stranger offering a shocking confession. It wasn't another theory about what happened inside that burning house. Instead, it was a rumor about something hidden much closer to home. Something that, according to whispers around Fayetteville, had been buried on the Sodder property itself. At first, the story sounded impossible. People claimed that after the fire, something had been secretly placed underground. A wooden box, hidden away, out of sight. But nobody seemed to know exactly who had buried it, or why. Some believed it was indeed connected to the missing children. Others thought it was simply another strange rumor attached to a case that had already produced countless unanswered questions. And for years, the story remained just that: a story, a rumor. A disturbing tale passed from person to person, but eventually the Sodder family discovered something that made the rumor far more unsettling. It was true. A wooden box had in fact been buried on their property, and inside were the remains of an animal. The discovery created even more questions. Why was this buried there? Who placed it there? And why had George and Jenny never been told? According to later accounts, someone connected to the fire department, widely reported to have been Fire Chief F.J. Morris, admitted that the remains had been buried intentionally. And the reason? To help George and Jenny accept that their children had died in the fire, and to finally allow the family to move on. But instead of providing closure, the discovery created even more suspicion. Because if someone had secretly buried animal remains on the Sodder property in an attempt to convince the family that their children were gone, what else about the investigation could be trusted? For George and Jenny, it wasn't an answer. It was another unanswered question. Another reminder that the truth they'd spent years searching for might have been hidden from them all along. The mystery was no longer only about what happened on that Christmas Eve night. It was also about the actions of the people who were supposed to uncover the truth. And just when it seemed that the Sodder family had experienced every possible twist, another piece of evidence would arrive. A photograph. A single image that would reignite their hope and become one of the most famous clues in the entire Sodder family mystery. More than 2 decades had passed since the night that changed the Sodder family forever. 20 years had gone by since the devastating fire that had completely destroyed their home. 20 years since 5 of their children had vanished without a trace. For most families, a search lasting that long would have eventually come to an end. The unanswered questions would become too painful, the lack of any evidence too overwhelming. But George and Jenny Sodder simply refused to give up on themselves, on the investigation, and especially on their children. And so they continued searching. They continued waiting, and they continued believing that somewhere out there, one or more of their missing children might still be alive. And then, in the year 1967, a letter arrived at the new Sodder family home. Immediately, they noticed something rather unusual about it. There was no return address, no name from the sender, no explanation for why it had even been sent in the first place. Only a postmark from the state of Kentucky. And within this strange envelope was a single photograph, nothing else. The image showed a young man who appeared to be in his early 20s. At first glance, there appeared to be nothing unusual about him. He looked just like any other young man his age. But when George and Jenny turned the photo over to read the back, they saw something that they had spent years hoping to find. They believed that they were looking at their missing son, Louis Sodder. To them, the resemblance was impossible to ignore. The shape of his face, the dark hair, the expression in his eyes, and most importantly, a small scar beneath one of those eyes. George and Jenny believed that that scar matched an injury that Louis had suffered as a child. To them, this was much more than just a similar-looking face. It was a possible and tangible connection to the exact son that they had spent decades searching for. But unfortunately, the photograph only raised even more questions. Who exactly was this young man? Who sent the picture? And why had it only arrived after so many years of searching without a trace? Written on the back of the photograph was a strange and confusing message. It read, "Louis Sodder, I love brother Frankie, boys, A90132 or 35. The true meaning behind these utterly bizarre words has never been confirmed. Some believe that it may have been a hidden message. Others believe it may have simply been a mistake, a code, or even a clue that was never properly understood. But whatever the message meant, it immediately reignited a desperate hope within the Sodder family. A hope that their children were still alive. George and Jenny became convinced that their son had somehow survived the fire and was now living somewhere beyond their reach. They outright refused to dismiss the possibility. They even went as far as hiring a private investigator and sending him to Kentucky in an attempt to discover where exactly the mysterious photograph had come from. And yet, once again, the investigation led to more questions than it ever did to answers. The investigator returned empty-handed, without a confirmed identity, or even any explanation for the letter at all. Some reports claim that he disappeared from the investigation entirely. Others suggest that the trail simply went cold before he could uncover who it was that had sent the photograph. Either way, the answers that George and Jenny had been searching for remained out of reach. Over the years, the photograph has been examined by investigators, researchers, and those fascinated by the Sodder case. Some believe that the man in the image truly does resemble the missing Louis Sodder. They argue that the facial features, the hair, and the scar create a compelling connection. Others, however, remain skeptical. They point out that after more than 20 years had passed, 2 full decades, proving someone's identity from a single photograph was nearly impossible. After all, at the end of the day, there was no DNA evidence, no fingerprints, no official confirmation, and no way to know for certain who the man in that photo actually was. All that remained was one mysterious image, and a strange message that has never been fully explained. It could have been nothing more than a cruel hoax that was intentionally designed to give a still grieving family false hope. On the other hand, it could have been a genuine attempt by a missing child to reach out after years of silence. Or it could have been something in between. A clue that appeared far too late, and therefore was never fully understood. But regardless of what the photograph truly represented, it became one of the most fascinating pieces of evidence ever connected to the disappearance of the Sodder children. A single image, a few unexplained words, and a possibility that, after all these years, Louis Sodder might still be alive, somewhere out there. More than 80 years have passed since 5 children disappeared into the darkness on Christmas Eve. Officially, the case has never been solved. Some believe the children died in the fire. Others believe they were kidnapped. And some believe the truth has remained hidden for generations. So what could have happened? Well, over the decades, several theories have emerged about what happened to the 5 missing Sodder children. The simplest explanation is also the one officially accepted by investigators at the time, that the children died in the fire. According to this theory, the fire destroyed the upper floors of the house so completely that the remains of the 5 children were either overlooked or reduced to nothing that could be identified. However, this explanation has always been questioned. The Sodders pointed to the lack of recognizable remains, the missing ladder, the severed telephone line, and reports from witnesses who claimed to have seen the children after the fire. And of course, there was a whole nother possibility. That the fire wasn't an accident at all. The most prominent alternative theory is that some or all of the children were kidnapped, and that the fire was deliberately started to make it appear as though they had died. There were reports of suspicious activity around the house that night, and over the years, witnesses came forward claiming to have seen the children after the fire. But even this theory presents some enormous unanswered questions. There was never enough evidence to establish exactly who could have taken the children, where they were taken, or what ultimately happened to them. And despite decades of searching, none of the 5 children was ever definitively found. Other theories have suggested everything from an organized crime abduction to the possibility that the children were taken for financial reasons, but none has ever been proven. Almost every theory can explain some of the evidence, but none can explain all of it. The fire theory struggles to explain the absence of remains in some of the reports surrounding that night. The kidnapping theory struggles with the lack of definitive evidence showing where the children went. And every theory eventually reaches the same dead end. There is no final piece of evidence that tells us what happened, which brings us back to the mystery itself. What gives the Sodder case such longevity isn't just the number of unanswered questions. It's the number of answers that never seem to fit. A ladder that vanished. A phone line that had been cut. Witnesses who claimed to have seen the children after the fire. Evidence that contradicted the official investigation. Rumors that ultimately proved to be true. And a mysterious photograph that arrived more than 20 years later. Now, any one of those details might have been dismissed on its own, but together, they create one of the most haunting unsolved mysteries in American history. For their part, George and Jenny Sodder never stopped believing that at least some of their children had survived. Until the very day that they died, they continued searching for answers. Their billboard remained standing for decades, serving as a reminder that for one family, the case was never closed. Perhaps one day, new evidence or advances in forensic science will finally reveal what exactly happened that fateful Christmas night. Or perhaps the truth disappeared forever, along with the 5 Sodder children.